Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back in my YouTube channel, Beyond the Text, Decoding the Literature. In fact, it is a long gap. We have connected to each other, one another. And today we are going to discuss about the criticism in 18th century and 19th century, basically after the Romantic era, where the lyrical ballad and literaria, biographia literaria makes a boom in the world of literature. Now I'm going to read the theory today, so listen carefully. After the Romantics, the main development in critical theory were the work of Mind and late Victorian George Eliot, Matthew Arnold, and Henry James. George Eliot critical work ranges widely over classical and continental writers and philosophical issues as did Coleridge. It is worth emphasizing this since there are two distinct tracks in the development of English criticism. One track lead through Samuel Johnson and Matthew Arnold to T.S. Eliot and F.R. Lewis. This might be called the practical criticism track. It tends to center upon the close analysis of the work of particular writers and give us our familiar tradition of close reading. The other track like through Sidney, Wordsworth, Coleridge, George Eliot, and Henry James. This track is very much ideals lead rather than text lead. It tends to tackle big general issues concerned with literature. How are literary work structured? How do they affect readers or audience? What is nature of literary language? How does literature relate to the contemporary and to matters of politics and gender? What can we say? What can be said about literature from a philosophical point of view? What is the nature of act of literary composition? These track two preoccupations are very similar to concern of the critical theorists who become prominent from the 1960s onwards. And it is important to realize that these concerns are not an exotic imposition upon native Anglo-American approaches to literature, but rather have been part of it from the beginning. The insistence upon close reading in 1920 sprung partly from the work of Matthew Arnold in the previous century. Arnold has remained a key canonical figure in the history of English criticism, partially because F.R. Lewis adopted several of his ideas and attitude and gave them 20th century currency. Arnold feared that the decline of religion would leave an increasingly divided society with no common system of beliefs, value, and images, with potentially distorts consciousness. He saw literature as a possible replacement of religion in this regard, but believed that the middle classes, on whom the burden and responsibilities of democracy largely fell, had been progressively debased by materialism and Philistinism. The critic, the critic would help such people to recognize the best that he has been and the in the world, and thus enable them to give individual assent to the canon of great works, which had emerged through the collective wisdom of the ages. Arnold's Arnold's most significant thinking is contained in the essay The Function of Criticism. at the present time, and the study of poetry. He stresses the importance of literature of remaining disinterested, by which he means politically detached and uncommitted to any specific program of action. The goal of literary criticism is that of attaining pure, disinterested knowledge, that is, to use another of his favorite phrases, to simply appreciating the object as itself is really is. The object as it itself it really is, without wanting to praise the insight gain into the service of a specific line of action. Arnold's key literary critical device is the notion of touchstone, which avoids any definition of desirable literary qualities and merely suggests using aspects of the literature of the past as a means of measuring and assessing the literature of today. The way the touchstone works is concisely explained in J. A. Cutson Dictionary of the Literary Term and Literary Theory, third edition, Blackwell publication, 1991. A touchstone is dash dash so called because gold is tried by it. Matthew Arnold used the word in his essay The Study of Poetry, 1880. His connection with literary criteria and standards. Matthew Arnold advised that we should have always in mind lines and expression of the great masters and apply them as a touchstone to other poetry. He suggests that this touchstone method should provide the basis for a real rather than an historic or a personal estimate of poetry. In the first half of the 20th century, the key critical names in Britain were F.R. Lewis, T.S. Eliot, William Ibsen, and A.I. Richard. All except Eliot were at Cambridge in the 1920s and 30s, involved in the pioneering English school there, which had a powerful influence on the teaching of English worldwide up to the 1970s. Eliot's contribution to the canon of received critical ideas was the greatest, his major critical ideas being dissociation of sensibility, which coins from the Herbert Grison's edition of the Metaphysical Poet, his theory of impersonality, the essay tradition and the individual talent, and the objective correlative developed in his essay on Hamlet. Thank you very much.